Hey there, I'm Alex, and welcome to episode 2. This week I wanted to take a little more time going over the UI in depth, as well as nodes, understanding nodes, what they can and can't do, how they work, and giving you some information about the core nodes that you're going to be using quite a bit, so that you can understand what exactly they're doing in the background and how you should be thinking about them. I'll be comparing some things between Nuke and ComfyUI just so it becomes hopefully easier for you to navigate. And we wrap up by rebuilding the text to image workflow from scratch, just so you can understand how to make those connections, how to think about when you're building a workflow. And finally, I just show you how to save your workflow so that you can have it for the future, as well as some other things that I go through. Hopefully you find this one useful. Again, it'll get more fun the more episodes we start getting into, but getting through fundamentals and core concepts is very important for us to understand things and move forward. I want to thank everyone that reached out after the first episode. Like it's really nice to have more people having these conversations. Definitely stick around. I'll keep pumping them as time allows. All right. So with that said, let's get started. The first thing we're going to go ahead and do is launch ComfyUI. So in case you don't remember from last time, make sure you navigate to your Windows portable folder or whatever installation you have. And in this case, that's what I'm using. So just double click your run NVIDIA GPU.bat. That'll open the command line, and it'll take a beat for it to launch. So once that does, it'll open a new tab on your browser like it did last time. And this is where we left off. Now that we're here, let's do a bit of housekeeping. So first thing I usually do is I go to my manager here at the top, and that'll open the ComfyUI manager. And let's go ahead and update ComfyUI. Okay, so that's been updated successfully. So we can go ahead and close this. And now I'm going to say update all. And again, saying update all will update both ComfyUI and any custom nodes you have. I think at some point I'd read it's a good idea to update ComfyUI first and then do the update all. So that's kind of why I do it. It just seemed to bring less problems to people. So that's how I've been doing it for a long time. So that's updating in the background. We'll give it a second, and then it'll prompt us to restart the moment it's done. Okay, so there you have it. Now let's go ahead and click the restart button. And yes, I want to reboot the server. So that'll take a second. Again, we can check our command line to see what's going on in the background. And it's going to go ahead and update anything that has changed. Looks like we are reconnected now, so we can just go ahead and refresh the tab by hitting F5. And now we are up and running with the latest ComfyUI and the latest custom nodes that we've installed. One thing to keep in mind, while I will be updating ComfyUI to the latest version every time we start a new video, keep in mind that you might not necessarily want to do this all the time. There is always a chance that a custom node or a workflow breaks with an update to ComfyUI. So if you're using it for something work-related or a project you're working on, if you want to make sure that nothing breaks and everything's working as intended, maybe it's a good idea to just keep it at the version you have until you're ready to move on and you can risk updating. The other thing you can do is you can also create a copy of your ComfyUI portable folder and then try updating there. If nothing breaks, and you know that you can update it in your default stream. The next thing I want to go ahead and do is actually fix one of the custom nodes that we installed, the Chris tools. So you see how we get the percentages, but we don't get bars. So I noticed that last time, and I figured I'd leave it for this time to go ahead and fix it. So there seems to be a bit of a bug with one of the ComfyUI updates that happened in the last couple of weeks, and the developer hasn't yet fixed it, but there is a fix. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And we'll see what happens. The developer is already aware, and he will update it. So, it'll just overwrite whatever changes we make. But for now, let's go ahead and make that change ourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and close the ComfyUI manager. And I have a tab here of where I found the other people having the same problem. So you can see here how they're not getting bars either. And the text is at the top instead of at the center. So somebody put a solution here, and like I said, the dev is already aware. So let's just go ahead and fix it because it's actually quite quick. If we come to our ComfyUI folder here, it looks like we have to navigate to, let's see, ComfyUI, custom nodes. In custom nodes, because we only have 2 installed and we know it's the Chris tools, we're going to go ahead and open Chris tools. And then from here, we want to go to the web folder, and in the web folder, there are two files we need to modify. If we look at the post here in GitHub, they're saying styles.js and styles.ts. So let's go ahead and find that here. I'm going to go ahead and open both styles.js and styles.ts. And all we need to do is replace one of the lines of code with this new line of code. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to place a link to that so that you can go ahead and update it. So I'm going to go ahead and select that text, right? So that's the text we need to change for the new one. And all that's changing here is that it looks like ComfyUI being capitalized is what's breaking it. So I'm going to go ahead and select it and paste the update, save both files. And now I can go ahead and close this. Now I'm going to go back here to ComfyUI and go to my command line, and I'm going to go ahead and close the server because we want to restart it. So now going back to my ComfyUI folder, I'm going to navigate back to ComfyUI here and run the NVIDIA GPU. So now that that's done, you can see at the top, that's looking like it should. So we have percentage bar. We don't just have the percentage in the name, but we have actual bars telling us how much of our resources are taken. I also wanted today to take a little more time talking about how the UI is laid out and where things are. So again, starting at the top here, you see we have our custom Chris tools installed for that resource manager. Then we have our ComfyUI manager, which again loads that window that we use every time we want to update or install custom nodes. And then there's a couple things here, which some more important than others, like favorite custom nodes. We don't really need that at the time, but we'll get to that in time. And then there are two that might be helpful if you find that your resources are, like if you find your computer is choking after you're already done generating something and you're doing something else, it might be a good idea to free the model and node cache, as well as the unloading of the models, because what happens here is the load checkpoint will put this in your video memory, and it'll just stay there until you're done, basically, or until it runs out and needs to load something else. Then it'll unload and then load again. So if you find that your VRAM is at 99% and your computer's choking, but you're not really needing to have that model loaded anymore, you can just go up here and offload the model so that you gain that RAM back. So let me just give you an example. So I'm going to hit Control Enter here just so that we go ahead and start a generation, and you see that's going through my load checkpoint, which is green at the moment. And if we look here at the top, you'll see in a moment how VRAM is going to start to fill up with that model. There we go. So you see we were at 20% and now we're at 48%, right? So that means that the model has taken that percentage of RAM and it's just keeping the model there, even though if we look at our UI here, our generation is complete, right? So that's done here. If you wanted to free up those resources, right, it's as simple as coming here and say unload models, and you'll see how immediately the VRAM will go back to 20% instead of 50%. Next up is the Q button, right? One thing to keep in mind is that you see these three dots here, you actually can unpin it from here, and you can just have it anywhere in your UI. So if it's something you want to keep at some people keep it at the bottom, on the right, in the middle. So you can just keep it wherever. I'm happy to keep it up there for now, so I'm just going to keep it there. Again, this is the alternative of doing Control Enter. It'll queue our workflow here and go ahead and generate that image for us. And then we have a few options here. So if you look at the down arrow here, it gives us a few options. So you have queue, which it'll just do what we're doing, basically that clicking of the button. So that's queuing, right? Then if we switch it to instant, when we hit play or we just click it, it'll just keep generating until we tell it to stop. So you see how the generations just keep going and going and going until we tell it to stop. And that's where that red X here at the top comes in. So I can just say cancel current run. And I'm going to say, actually, I need to switch it to queue first, right? And then it'll just do that. It'll just cancel that run. Then next up is on change. So if we switch it to on change here, right? And I'm going to zoom out here again, and I'm going to make a change. So I'm going to go ahead and change the seed number. So if I change the seed number, you see it immediately starts going. And then because it's set to randomize, it's changing every time a generation happens. Then it just keeps going and going and going. So again, I'm going to change this from randomized to fixed. So you'll see the next time it finishes, it'll just stop, right? Because nothing has changed. If I change the steps, let's say 21, you'll see it'll just do that. For me now, I'm just going to keep it at queue because I won't have control over when it starts. I don't really need it to just constantly be pumping out images. So I'll just keep it at queue. And then again, here at the top, you have you can cancel any pending tasks. So because you can queue multiple things at a time, And again, if I hit Q, let's say if I just up the count here to say I want to do 10 generations, and I say Q, so it looks like because I have it fixed, it's not doing anything. So I'm just going to hit randomize. I'm going to come up here again, and I'm going to say Q, right? And it'll start pumping out those images. It'll go through that queue of 10. If I want to cancel that queue, I can just say clear pending tasks, and then it'll probably just stop after the next one. There you go. So it didn't go through the 10. It'll just do wherever. It'll just kill that line of generations that we had done. So I'm going to go ahead and change that back to 1 because I only want 1 at a time. And then again, the next button here is the toggle bottom panel, which we discussed last time. And that'll make it so that you have your console at the bottom. Then the next one here is the hide menu. So you can just click that and you see all the UI is gone except for that button, right? So if you need a bit more real estate, you can do that. Keep in mind, you can also just full screen this, and you can just whatever the hotkey for your browser is. I think mine is F11. So there you go. You can just work full screen if you want it. Or you can just kill the UI and get a bit more space if you need it. Then here at the bottom we have the zoom in and out. Again, it's just the same as the mouse wheel, so I'm going to be using that. The fit view is so that it centers your workflow or your nodes. And then the next one here is toggle link visibility, and that'll do as you expect. It just hides the connections between the nodes, but the connection's still there. I can just go ahead and still queue this. Things are connected. You're just getting rid of the lines. Some people like to build small apps, if you want to call it, inside here. So if you wanted to stack your nodes in a neat way so that it looks more like a software rather than a set of nodes, you can do that, and you can just disable your connections, and that way, not disable the connections but hide the connections, and that's how you would do that. So I'm going to go ahead and undo all of this, turn back my connections, and move on to the next one. Here at the bottom we have the settings again, and that'll open the settings window. And I would recommend you should definitely go ahead and take a look at everything. I'm not going to go through everything because there's just a lot of stuff that we don't need to go through, but I would recommend you get familiar with the options that you have in here. One important one to note is that there is an about tab here on the left, and that'll give you a bunch of information about your system, your hardware that you're running it on. So not only that, but it'll also tell you the version of Comfy that you're running. So definitely want to check out if it's something you need. Another menu you should get familiar with is the key binding. So if you click here on the left to key binding, what you'll get is a list of all the hotkeys that are currently being used. So you should go ahead and at least look at them and learn a few that you think are useful, and make sure that you modify any that you want to change or add new ones that maybe don't have a hotkey attached. There is also a link I'll be sharing with you with basically that list already here on the ComfyUI GitHub, so you can just have that, maybe copy it into an image and just have it as a bit of a cheat sheet while you're working for the first few times until you get a hang of it. Next up is the little moon here at the bottom, and that's so you can toggle from light to dark theme. Do keep in mind that you can just go into settings here, go to appearance, and there's a bunch of different themes that you can change from. So you can just toggle through and find one you like. So I'm going to keep it at dark default. Next up is the workflows tab here on the left. So if we click that, you see we're empty because we haven't really saved any workflows. We'll get to that in a bit. Next up is a model library. This is where you can check anything you have installed. So last time we installed the checkpoint, we created that SDXL folder, and in there we have the SDXL model that we downloaded. So this is where you can go ahead and search, make sure you have something or you don't. You can just do this, or you can just navigate through the Windows Explorer if you wanted to do it that way. Finally, we have the node library, and this is, it'll basically show you all the nodes you have available, including custom nodes like the crystals that we installed for the resource manager. And then up here we have the queue. So the queue it'll just show you every generation you've done, right? So in the last since you launched the session. And from here you can click and you can preview your generations. You can actually drag in your generations, and that'll copy that workflow. That way you can regenerate that image if you wanted to, and make sure that you have that settings that you kept. So that's it for the queue menu here on the left. Next, we have the main three here at the top, which are the workflow. We can start a new workflow, and that'll create a new tab for us. If we do that, you can see the new tab here, or we can just open a workflow. We can browse templates, which we didn't talk about last time, but there's a few templates that come pre-installed. So if you want to say, hey, image generation, that's one we've been using. And then we can save our workflow. We can save as, right? So it's the same for the workflow. We can export our workflow for other people to go ahead and grab it. And then on the edit, we have, the regular stuff like undo, redo. This is an important one, the R to refresh. So sometimes when you copy a model into a folder in the background, if let's say you downloaded a model, you paste it on that folder, you want to hit R, you want to refresh so that it'll show up in the list here of checkpoints, right? So you can't do that for new custom node installations, but you can refresh to get it, repopulate the lists inside of nodes like that. Next, we have the clear workflow. So that'll basically just, nuke everything we have in our script. So if I do that, it'll just give us a clean canvas from where to start from. Finally, we have the help menu. And again, that'll just take you to different places like the documentation, issues page on ComfyUI GitHub, and the Discord and about ComfyUI. So not a lot that you'll be using here, but important for you to know that those are there if you need them. Now I want to show you how to add nodes. So that's something we really haven't talked about much. So I'm gonna go ahead and move my workflow here to the top. There's a couple ways how you can do it. I'm gonna go zoom in here to my canvas, and the first one is if you right click anywhere on the canvas, you'll see we have that add node option in the menu. And then from there, you'll essentially have a list of all installed nodes, right? So if you go to image, you can bring in a save image node, right? So that's how you do it from that menu. To me, this is fine, but it's almost like navigating menus in Nuke instead of using the tab button. So so just to make a comparison there, if we come here to Nuke, it would be like me navigating the menus here on the left to bring something. So let's say I want to bring in a blur, right? Instead of me doing it through the tab. So if I say blur, right? So that's the difference there, right? So to me, the tab is the way to go. So that's more or less why I wanted to compare it. If I come back here into ComfyUI, now we know about the right menu add node, but you can also just double click anywhere on the canvas, right? And that'll bring up the search node. So it's essentially like the tab in Nuke. And from here, we can just say save image, right? So it'll just start populating. A couple things about this screen that I find quite helpful, especially when you're starting off, is you see how you get a preview of the node here on the left. So as we type, it populates, but as we hover over different options, you see, let's say the save latent. So you can see what the node will look like. So maybe you want to make sure that it has what you're looking for, especially when you're starting and you don't know what nodes do, what kind of connections they accept. This is a good way of just previewing without necessarily bringing them into your workflow. The other important thing to keep in mind about the search here is that it'll tell you what node pack it's coming from. So all of these are from Comfy Core. Comfy Core means that they come installed by default with ComfyUI. If I were to search for Chris, which remember this is the installation we did for the resource monitor, comes with resource monitor as well as some other nodes. So you see these, if we look here on the left, they'll list that they come from that node pack, right? So important for you to know the difference between the custom nodes and the core ComfyUI nodes. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in one of these from the Chris tools. This is another way of telling when a node is core or custom. And you'll see when we look at save the same image node, which has, let's say, a number 15 here at the top, if it doesn't have any name, right, that means that it's a core node. If it has a different name here at the bottom, like this one does with the ComfyUI Chris tools, then that means, this is from the Chris tools package. So you can very quickly tell when building a workflow if you're using something from a specific pack, or if you wanted to just keep it to maybe Comfy Core so that you can share a workflow and other people can grab it without needing to install third-party nodes. That would be a way to tell. Next up, I want to spend a little time talking about nodes themselves. So I know some people are more comfortable with node-based systems than others. In my case, I have a Nuke background, so of course I'm very comfortable with nodes. But still, when you're starting, it might seem a bit daunting because it does look different, right? When you see a Nuke script versus this, it is quite different. So I want to take a little time just talking about nodes in general and the things that they can and can't do. So I have a bit of a list that I want to get through here. Initially, the very important things for you to know is that nodes can be copied, right? So if you see Control-C, you can paste it. So you can do Control-V. But this is also important to note. So you can just, let's say we want to copy that. And the way I'm selecting that is holding Control and then dragging to make a selection of multiple nodes. And I'm going to go ahead and do Control-C. And now if I do Control-V, right, it'll just paste that as we expected, right? However, if you do Control-Shift-V, it'll paste those nodes but it'll also keep the connections intact. So if you're trying to branch out your workflow, right, you don't necessarily need to copy paste and then redo all the connections. This way it'll keep the outgoing or the outgoing connections for those nodes from where they were connected on the left, right? So if I do Control V, it'll just do the nodes. If I do Control Shift V, it'll do the same thing, but keeping the connections here to the left. The other thing the nodes can do is that you can move them. Of course, you're free to move them anywhere, no matter how far or how close. You can always do that. The connections will not break unless you break them by hand. They can be pinned. So if you're working on a workflow that you want to templatize and you want to make sure that you don't move anything by mistake, or you want to make sure that you give it to someone and that it returns to you in the same way, there's a way of just keeping nodes in place. I don't know how useful this is, but it's something you can do. So if you go to a node here and you right click it, you can select pin. And what pin does, see, it adds that red icon there. And now it means that if I want to move that node, you see I'm clicking and dragging and it's just pinned in place, right? So that's what it does. So if I want to move it again, I can right click and I can say unpin, and now I'm free to move that node again. So next thing is they can be renamed, right? So let's say, because this is all based on positive and negative prompts in this specific case, you can go up here to the top of the node and you can double click it, and that'll make it so that you can rename your node. So I'm going to say here positive, and for the bottom one, I'm going to say negative. Right? Because I know positive and negative prompts, so that's how this works. Important to know that nodes can also be disabled. If we go here into Nuke, right, and we had a node, we can just hit D to disable that node, right? So you can do that ComfyUI as well by selecting the node, and you have a couple options. One that I find more useful than the other, but important for you to know the difference. So you can bypass nodes, right? So if you hit Control B when selecting a node, you see it'll go purple. That'll mean that the workflow will still go through that node, but it'll ignore anything that node is pushing it to do, right? So in this case, we can't really bypass this because it'll just fail. It'll say, hey, I have no positive input here. Let's say we had a grade, right? And then we have a transform here, and this is our node stack. If I were to disable the blur, right, then that means that it'll do the grade, it'll do the transform, but it's going to skip this. That's what bypassing is. Whereas muting it, if we go back here again, if you want to mute a node, and that it's with Control M, selecting the node and Control M, you see it gets a bit dark and transparent. That'll make it so the workflow will stop the moment it hits that node. Again, I don't think I've ever used muting a node, but it's important for you to know the difference. So that's the two hotkeys you need to know: Control M for muting and Control B for bypassing, which B is the same as disabling a node in Nuke with the hotkey D. Just like you would expect, nodes can be deleted, so you can just select it, hit the delete key, and the node will be gone. So you can do that. Nodes can have incoming or outgoing connections. So I'm going to make a copy of my case sampler here. I'm going to zoom in so you see we have on the left are the incoming connections, and then on the right we have the outgoing connections. So just like some Nuke nodes, you have incoming and outgoing connections. Just one thing is that a node can have multiple outgoing connections as well. So just keep that in mind. Not only that, but you can connect multiple things to certain inputs. So, as we start evolving, you'll see some nodes behave slightly different than others, but as a baseline, that's important for you to know that they can be connected as an input or that they have an exit as an output. You can also change the color of nodes. So usually, I'm going to go back here to my positive and negative nodes. Usually, people tend to tint positive and negative just as a way to quickly be able to see the workflow and know where your positive and negative prompts are. So if we select our node here, we can right click and we can go down to colors, right? And from here, you can just select a color. So usually people tint the positive green, and then for the negative one, they just tint it red. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And now if I zoom out here for you guys, you can see we have now changed the color of our node. So you can change it to, whatever you have there on the list. Another important thing to know is that nodes can be resized, so you can grab it here from the corner on the left, or actually, yeah, I think it's the only corner you can grab it from. So corner on the left, and you can drag out and make that node as big or small as you see fit. So let's say you want to have a very large positive prompt, so you can definitely do that. You can also collapse nodes. This is something that sometimes I wish was handled a bit different, but you'll get used to it. The way I see ComfyUI, and again, I'm going to compare it to Nuke because that's what I'm comfortable with. Let me just switch back here. Is ComfyUI is like having a bunch of property panels right next to each other, right? So you see we have our nodes, and this is what we know, right, as compositors, but it's a bit weird that you have all the panels open all the time, and that's essentially what's happening in ComfyUI. It's like, imagine if these property panels would have connections between them. That's what ComfyUI is doing. So it's always showing you everything under the sun in terms of options for your nodes. So that's a way of thinking of how this is built. And again, connections left to right instead of top to bottom. That's, I guess, a good way of seeing it. However, even though we do have all options for all nodes open all the time, you can collapse nodes. So if you look here at the top left, there is a little circle right next to the name. If I click that, it's going to collapse the node. So you can see we still have our positive prompt here, and I can click it again and I can expand that node. So if you have something that you need some real estate for and you're done doing that and you know it's not going to change, or you don't necessarily need to have it open in order to make your workflow a bit tidier, then you can go ahead and collapse it, right? So that becomes more of the type of node that we know in other packages. So that way you don't necessarily have all options open all the time, and you can do this for all nodes. So that's also pretty neat. So you can at least have a workaround in terms of how things are laid out. Talking about connections again, I think it's important for you to know that, hold on, let me generate an image just so we get rid of that error. So important to know that not only are they color coded, right? So it's very easy to see if I were to just, break this connection here, and break this connection here, and break this connection here. So I'm going to break everything here from the case sampler. It's very easy to know where things can go, right? Because the moment I start dragging connection out, you see, if you look at the case sampler here on this side, what you'll see is that these remain on while model and latent image are turned off or just dimmed, right? So if I start dragging, you see all the other connections are, not only do they now allow me to connect, but they turn off, right? So it's a very easy way of seeing where this can connect, right? So you have that, so you can connect it to only the colors that are compatible with the node. So that's pretty neat. Again, I'm going to go ahead and now drag my model all the way here to my case sampler, and I'm going to do the same here for my latent image and reconnect it there. Another thing about connections, especially when you're starting out, you don't necessarily need to know what to connect next. So there's a bit of an adventure in that sense that you can just grab a node. So let's say I want to have my load checkpoint, right? So I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of it here. I'm going to paste it. And now if I go ahead and not have the next node ready for it to connect. So we know now that the load checkpoint connects to the positive, negative, and the case sampler, right? So that's what those three connections would go to. If you don't know, or if you just want to explore what other possibilities a node can have, the software will show you options. So if I drag here, right, and I let go, right, it'll bring this menu up, and it'll give me some options, right? So it'll tell me you can, bring in a case sampler advanced, LoRa loader. So it'll give you an idea of what else can be connected. So instead of having to right click and look for the case sampler, or right click and look for the case sampler here, you can just drag from that model and say, hey, okay, boom, case sampler. So that'll save you some steps once you know what sort of recommendations pulling a connection does. So here, obviously, it's going to offer a clip, so that way you can just save some time by knowing what it will offer. Not only that, but it'll educate you as well as to what can be added. Also important to note is that just like we have dots in Nuke, so if we had a connection that we wanted to move around so that our workflow is a bit more tidy, you can do the same thing here in ComfyUI, which is quite neat. So you can just, again, drag like I showed you here, and in the options, it's going to show you reroute, right? So you can just click that, and that'll create a reroute node. So again, we can do this as many times as we want, right? And that way you can make it so, the lines don't necessarily cross, and you can have something that looks a bit neater. So let's say we have, I'm going to go ahead and delete this here at the bottom. I don't think I have anything else. So if I go ahead and select, again, I drag from my load checkpoint model and I say reroute, right? And I say again here, reroute. And now I'm going to connect it this way. So that way our line isn't going through something that we can't see, so that we might not miss a connection. So this is a way of keeping things tidy. Just another way for you to know that it's something you can do. So I can do the same here with a VAE instead of it going through all of those nodes. Just like with Nuke scripts, you want to keep this as tidy as you can, and as readable as you can, especially when you're working with other people. So that would be a way of doing that. So reroute nodes are awesome, and you're going to be using them a lot, or at least I do. So that'll give you a pretty good baseline of the things nodes can and can't do, and what you can start playing around. But I did want to take the time to do that because that is the foundation. Like if you don't know what they can, how you handle nodes, or how they can be treated, then you're going to have a much harder time. So this hopefully gives you a baseline to at least get started. Since we talked about reroute nodes as a way of keeping our scripts organized or our workflows organized, I think it's also important for you to know that you can use the backdrops that we have in Nuke. So if I go back here into Nuke, if we were to select our nodes here and just add a backdrop, it'll just do that, right? So that way, there's a way of keeping our scripts organized, easier to read, and a way of moving a group of nodes around. So you can do the exact same thing in Comfy. So just by selecting a group of nodes, so I'm going to go ahead and select the whole workflow because it's a rather small stack of nodes here, and I'm going to right click add group for selected nodes, right? So this option here around the middle. And what that'll do is just essentially just add that backdrop. So now any node that is in that backdrop can be moved around, or not backdrop, but group can be moved around. Just like nodes, groups can be renamed. So if you double click the name here, you can just name it whatever you want. And this is a way, again, of keeping things a bit modular. So you can just have different bits and pieces. And as we get more advanced, there's other things that can help you by having things inside groups, like turning off specific groups when a workflow hits a specific branch. So it's quite helpful, and it's also a way of keeping things organized. Just like other nodes, you can select that group and hit delete, and that'll get rid of that backdrop for us. So now that we're comfortable enough with nodes and more or less how to navigate inside ComfyUI, I want to take a minute to recreate the text to image workflow and walk you through exactly how you should be thinking about each node and understanding what it's doing under the hood. So I've laid out some notes here for me to go through as we start adding nodes. We go here at the beginning. The first thing we need to know is we need our load model, right? So we know that if we load our checkpoint, that's the node we've been using so far. And from here, you're going to be selecting the specific model you want to be using. Think about the model, right, itself as the artist scale, right? Which is what I have here on my notes. So the example I have here is that you wouldn't necessarily ask an artist that focuses on doing beauty work to give you the most amazing matte painting, or to work on explosions in Houdini, right? So you need to think about models as something that has been trained on specific data that are very good for some things, but not necessarily good at everything, or at something in specific. Like you need to know what a model is and what its strengths and weaknesses are. And that's what the model is. So think about it as an artist and what it can do and what its skill, its knowledge is, right? So that's a little checkpoint. From there, we know that we need to give the artist instructions, right? So we have our artist, but we need to tell it what to do. So that is what the clip output here comes. And I'm going to go ahead and select the clip text encode. And so here is, think about the positive prompt as you giving it instructions. So if you're a supervisor, or a lead, or a client, you're telling the artist, this is what I want, right? So I want to see a puppy, right? So that's exactly what I want. So you want to give it clear instructions and clear things of what you want to see. And then on the opposite, you want to give it another, I'm going to drag here again from the clip and say again, clip text encode. You want to do for the negative, you want to say what things you don't want to see. So I don't want cats, right? So let's say for my negative, I'm going to say I don't want cats, I want a puppy. The other thing you need to know is that, okay, so we have our artist, and we know the project that we're going for. We're trying to do a photo of a puppy. So let me just add the word photo of a puppy, right? And we don't want any cats around, right? So we have those parameters set. Now we need to think, okay, so what resolution is this project delivering in? So let's say, because we know the strengths of our artist, in this case, models have been trained on a specific resolution. So because I know SDXL is trained on 1 megapixel images, then we know that we need to tell the artist, okay, the canvas you're going to be working on, or the image you're going to be delivering to us, is going to be 1024 by 1024. So this is where we would set that. So we double click and I'm say empty latent image, right? And here we tell it the width and the height of our image. So because I know the SDXL, which is the model we're using, that juggernaut that we downloaded on the first episode, then I can confidently say that 1024 by 1024 is the optimal. So any image that is 1 megapixel will perform the best. It's important, and I added this here on my notes, that you respect the image size per model, and you can find more information about these models very easily online. So again, SDXL is a 1 megapixel, but if you go past, right, if you just say, hey, do this at 2048 by 2048, you're probably going to be encountering problems of the prompt trying to double up. So if you ask for 1 puppy, it might give you 2 because it has twice the amount of space to work with, and the model doesn't really understand what to do with that much more space, so it's probably just going to throw another puppy at you. So that's what the empty latent does. It gives that instruction of saying, okay, because I know this artist is good at working at 1 megapixel images, that's where I'm going to keep it. So now that we have model, we have the instructions of what we want, what we don't want, what resolution we want to work in. We want sort of the, let's call it, yeah, the oven or the package where we're going to be working in, right? So this would be our K sampler, right? Just is kind of the brains of how everything comes together. So the K sampler takes model input, takes positive input, takes negative input, and takes latent image input, as we know. So now I'm going to go ahead and tell, okay, so the artist, I'm connecting you now to the software where you're going to be working on. So let's think about this as we have the artist, we have the instructions, and now we're giving it the tool, right? So let's say this is the nuke, right? So we're giving it the K sampler connection here, and then we're connecting the photo of a puppy to our positive because that's what we want to see, and then the cats to the negative because that's what we don't want to see. And for latent image, that's telling it, again, just the resolution it should be working on. So think about this as putting, like I have here, putting all elements together and getting to work, right? So this would be like the comp work based on skill, and that from the checkpoint and whatever that was trained on, the instructions, as well as the resolution that's coming from the latent image. So from here, we move on to the decoding of that latent image. So if I pull here from the latent, I know that I need a VAE decode. And it's important to know that the way this technology works is in latent space, so you can read some more about this, but anything happens in the latent space needs to be decoded for us to get the pretty images or the pretty videos. So that's why we need something that gets encoded into latent space. This is by default, the latent image is by default just telling it the size, but everything happening inside the K sampler is in the latent space that needs to be decoded into pixels, if you will. So imagine this as going from, because this works in much lower resolution, the way this brain is built, right? Think about it as having a comp with a bunch of $GUI toggles set up, right? So let's say you keep motion blur off, you have particle systems off. So you keep things that are holding you back from working faster, right? Until you render. So think about it more or less in that sense. So this is like going from a proxy comp that you're seeing in the viewer to something that's just, all the bells and whistles, and that's where we decode that image into the pixels that we see. So once that decoding process happens, we want to go ahead and now we get an output image, right? So we go from that to the output image, and then here we want to either preview our image or we want to save our image, right? So that's the two options you have. So the preview is just that. It'll just show you the image. You can't save it from the preview, but it doesn't save it by default. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And then we have, our save image, which is essentially a write node. So this is just saving out the generation into disk. So let's say you can give it a name. So let's say we want to call it puppy, right? And that way we know that that's going to have the naming convention we have. And you can get more granular with the save image node. If you hover here, it'll give you some information of things you can add, like dates will be embedded, or you could, there's a bunch of documentation on this, and there's actually some nicer save image nodes, but for now, this is fine. Also keep in mind that you can add tabs like that, and that way you can say, this is our puppy sequence, right? And then this is the puppy at shot level. So there you go. So that way, if you put it like that, that means that it's going to be saved under a puppy sequence folder, right? So again, just keeping it simple for now. So I'm going to keep it at puppy if it will allow me. There we go. And now we want to go ahead and connect it via E. It'd be really good for you to take at least some time and read about some of these concepts. But for now, I'm just going to connect it and we'll assume that's correct. So now if I hit Control Enter, it's going to go through and it's generating our puppy. And great. So now we have our puppy image created, and that's it looks like the artist was the correct one. It followed the instructions. It gave us the correct resolution, and we have the output image, and there's no cats around. So success. One thing to keep in mind is that because the case sampler is a way of guiding that model into generating your image, whenever you download models from Civit AI or anywhere else, there's always a list of recommended settings. So I know that for the Juggernaut specifically, I know I should probably be using Keras, right, for the scheduler, and for the sampler name, I should probably be using DPMPP2M, and then CFG, probably something around 5, and steps maybe 30. So again, doesn't mean you're going to get bad results, but there's always an optimized set of attributes that you should be setting on the case sampler for generations on specific models. So you can't just assume that the default's always going to work, right? So you can see this generation is much nicer than the previous one. So if we go here to our queue, you can see, yes, this is an okay puppy, but there's some weirdness on the fur. Maybe the nails are a bit on the weird side. And again, we're doing something that's very bare bones, but this was with the, let's call it the wrong set of instructions on that case sampler, whereas this one feels better. Again, it's not perfect, but it is an improvement over the last one. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how to think of these main nodes as we move forward. Now that we have our text to image workflow, let's say we wanted to go ahead and save this so that we can bring it back in, have all of our settings set up for the next time we need it. Then that's where we would come up here to the save output here in the workflow. So if we go ahead and click the save button here, it's going to prompt us and ask us for a name, right? So let's say we're going to call this puppy text to image, right? So let's say that's what we're calling it. So I'm going to go ahead and click confirm, right? So okay, looks like something happened in the background. It didn't prompt us to where we wanted to save it. If you want to be prompted where you want to save it, you can just go ahead and save as, and that'll just, ask you where you want to place it. Let me just show you where those workflows get saved. So one option is if you go here on the left to workflows, you have now our puppy text to image workflow, right? So that's one way. If you want to know exactly where that JSON sitting on your machine, you can just go into your file browser, right? And in here, in your ComfyUI in your Windows Portable folder, you want to go into ComfyUI and then into user and then default, finally workflows. So in here, we have our puppy text to image JSON. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and close this this workflow, right here. And yeah, again, we're greeted with the an unsaved workflow of the default, right? So let's say this is not what we wanted, right? Let's say we want to keep working on our puppy workflow. So you can just either bring it here from the menu on the left, so the workflows, and just click there and it'll load it for you. So I'm going to go ahead and close it, show you a different way, or you can just go into your workflows folder as we just navigated through, right? So inside ComfyUI user default workflows, and you can just drag that in. Also remember, you can also go into your outputs, and because we have our puppy generations there, you can just drag it in, and again, that's going to populate ComfyUI, because by default, anything that goes into the save image node has the workflow embedded. That way you can save your workflow, but also bring it in a few different ways. So if you ever make modifications to a workflow, right, and then decide that, oh no, like I made a mistake and I wish I could go back a few versions, because this isn't, the workflows aren't necessarily version saved unless you make a point of it, and unless you say save as and then just save it at 002, you can always go back to your old generations, right? Like we did with our puppy. Again, if we go here, if we go to our the original puppy we did, I can go back to that generation just by dragging that image. So even though we didn't save that workflow specifically, we still have access to those initial settings that generated that puppy because we have that image. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes it's a good idea to keep old generations around for a bit, as a way, as a safety net in case you evolve your workflow in a direction and just keep saving over and over and over itself. And then you realize like, oh man, I made a mistake. I wish I could go back. You can always go back through test images that you did as you moved on. So once again, just like last week, this was a bit of a heavier episode. It'll get easier now that we have these core concepts and fundamentals in place. Take a time to be curious about it, read things that maybe I didn't cover, like VAE, maybe read a little bit more about case sampler, how things are happening in the latent space. I think it's important for you to understand some of those things, and it's going to make it easier when you see other people doing workflows and then you just bring it in. So your mind is blown. But it's important for you to understand these core concepts and fundamentals so that moving forward, you can start creating your own workflows. I think that's going to do it for this week, and I'll see you next time. Stay curious. Cheers.